Hey, Jennifer, are you on?
I am.
Hi.
Hi.
Are we ready to get going then?
Yes. I'm sorry. I just got out of another meeting, so.
No problem. All right, Seth, is that everybody we need?
Yep, I think you should be good.
All right, I'm going to first go ahead and call the meeting to order, and just like to welcome you all to this Zoom meeting for April 15th. We're going to talk about grading policy through the district during this closure time. Just real quick for those that are at home, perhaps watching, my name is Casey Morser. I'm our board chair, and there's a number of administrators on the meeting with us today, but also the rest of the board. So I'd just like to recognize those folks. So we have Rebecca Smith, Tambra Pickford, Lisa May, and Jennifer Brumley. And then also Dr. Cook, our superintendent, is on board and will be talking quite a bit, I would assume. So welcome and thanks for joining us. Is there a motion to approve today's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Dr. Cook, I'll turn it over to you to kind of kick us off here.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for this impromptu meeting, guys. Appreciate this a lot. If you recall, it's been a couple of weeks now. We closed school on March 16th under kind of a premise of we knew there was going to be an issue. We weren't sure to what extent. And we rolled out at-home learning, at which one point we kind of considered that as a gap to get us through what we thought was going to be at least an extended spring break. And we went into that time with thinking we might be either making up some extra time by adding some minutes to the days or something of that nature. When the state board kind of took a little more assertive direction and said we're going to be closed till April 15th and then later extended that, we were in the process of talking about changing over and transferring over to a different frame of learning, which was a lot more structured, kind of almost like level 2, if you will. We called that remote learning, and where we started with, and I think you're going to hear from us today that this design that we're going to talk about now is how do we get through the rest of the year, potentially attending school the rest of the year virtually in a remote setting, and how we're going to handle grading during that time, because it's become, we have recommendations. We believe that we've got some answers for this, but we also recognize that there's not a one size fits all for this process as we move forward. Any path we take has implications for kids. And so we've got some discussions to have, and because there's actually 3 different sets of policies: the grading and progress report policy, which is 2620, academic achievement policy, which is 2420 and 2450, and retention and promotion policies that are impacted by these decisions. We felt an imperative to get you guys involved in the conversation and actually talk through what that might look like. Currently, we're in a kind of a position of a pass-fail model, essentially with living by guidance from the state board, that is, do the best we can to hold harmless students that are impacted by this and to do no damage to students' grades based upon implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that's a really cool statement, but that's a very difficult statement to live by because of the loss of opportunity to compete for grades if you do pass-fail, or if you do something other than pass-fail, then you wind up with situations where we're talking about uneven access and inequitable ability to compete for what those grades might be, even in an environment where we're reducing probably down to essential standards for this next several weeks and probably narrowing the scope of what we want to teach to kids because the environment's going to limit our ability to do that. So we felt like it was important for us to bring this conversation to you guys and work through what does that look like to do as little harm as possible to our students in the grading practices that we're going to put into place for the rest of this. And actually, we've got a recommendation for you guys, and I think we want to talk that through and/or listen to feedback. And if there are modifications suggested, then incorporate those modifications as necessary, so that at the end of the day, when we're done with this, we feel like we've got the best opportunity for our kids to be safe, to be protected in the actions that we're taking for the next, I think, 8 weeks. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Trina and have her talk just a little bit about the communication process that we implemented and how that's then translated. And I think she's brought, or I know she's brought Libby and Deanne to help inform this from the lens of comprehensive high schools. And then we've also got Teresa here to give us from the lens of our alternative school, which is on, by the way, a different grading mechanism by functioning in a trimester. So I'll turn this over to Trina and let her get us going.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. In your packet, I provided some background information on remote learning and grading and GPA, as well as some scenarios that are really about real students. We did change a few details so we wouldn't be able to identify who those students were, and some sample approaches. But to kind of backtrack, where we originally started was when we had our first discussions about remote learning, and the guidance from the state about, making sure that seniors that are on track to graduate are still able to graduate. We got a group of folks together, Katie Groutman, our director of curriculum, the high school principals. We had some teachers and we had some counselors, and we started talking about, well, what does that mean to make sure seniors are on track to graduate? And our original discussion talked about being on track meant that, well, that you received all the credits that you should have received, that you were on track by the end of first semester. And then if life had continued as normal this spring and you would have received all the credits for the courses which you signed up for, then you would be on track. So we started talking through those things. We also started talking through what did pass-fail grading mean. On March 13th, we had some students that had grades in Skyward, but those grades were just, during our conversations, those grades were just what their grades were at that point in time. It's a snapshot. We had several students before March 13th that were sick and unable to make up work. We still had about 2/3 of the semester to go through, and as we know, students' grades fluctuate throughout the whole semester. And so we were talking about those decisions and what would it mean. We also talked through how some students are working very hard for their GPAs, and they were counting on this semester. And so we talked about the possibility of doing an appeal process. So if we were going to do pass or fail, would we have some sort of process where students could appeal their grades? And that's kind of where we're landing. As the closure continued, we started hearing from families and students. All schools at all levels are making a concerted effort to try to reach out to families and students and to make sure that we're hearing from everybody. We have a significant number of students at Coeur d'Alene High School. I think, Libby, you can correct me, about 166 or 116 that we have not heard from yet. So we're worried. We know we have some students that are able to get online and work on things, and we know others are having challenges getting access to internet, or they have multiple siblings that are trying to use the same device. And then we have some students that are basically trying to earn money during this time because they have family members that aren't able to do so. So as we were discussing that, then we were realizing that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all, and we do need some direction from the board. So I would open up to Katie or Libby or Deanne or Teresa, to share any insights that you have. We did include the communications in the packet, and I would just say that as our discussion went through, just like everything's been evolving, our communication's been evolving. We have not been very consistent, and I think that's because things were very nebulous. And so we've communicated things out differently to different groups of students. And so that's why we really do need to have a direction and some clarification, so that way we can make sure it's clear for all as we're moving forward.
This is Libby. I would like to offer just some data for us to think about. Right now, Coeur d'Alene High School is seeing about a 65 to 75% engagement with students in gen ed classes, and that number is higher with your AP and honors classes. And then I have been hearing from families, especially since last Friday, just a lot of hardship. That my son, and I'm quoting, is the major breadwinner for our family, and he is the only one that's able to work as we are compromised and at risk and at home. And then the other continuum is, how do I secure, my daughter has worked very hard for her grades this semester. How can we honor her hard work? So it's been really the extremes I'm hearing from, and not a lot of folks in the middle. And just, I think Deanne and I, well, everybody in this room is probably all means all kids matter, every kid matters. And so, we have a big challenge ahead of us to meet the needs of all these students. Right now, I'm feeling like I want to get kids hooked up with internet and fed, and it's like crisis schooling more than it is remote schooling right now. And I hope that this, we catch our stride and things fall into place. And I'll sign off for a minute unless anybody has any questions for me.
Well, and I'll join Libby in that we have about the same percentage of engagement. We do have fewer numbers of students who we haven't been able to reach. We only have identified 11 students that we haven't been able to actually reach. We had our A2 classes do an attendance call out, and Brian Kelly's been going through any students that teachers could not get a hold of and calling. We're going to do home visits on those, just double check and make sure we have the right address and that we're able to reach them. We'll need a little help probably after that with Trina talking about what our next steps are for those. But I want to just reiterate what Libby was saying is mostly what we're hearing from families are the hardships and what kids are going through. I got an email today that brought me to tears, really, from a student who wants to return her Chromebook because every time she looks at it, she starts crying and gets really upset because she just can't, she's too stressed, she can't do it, she's afraid of it, she wants to be in school, can she just return the Chromebook? And those are the kinds of feelings that kids are having. And some, like Libby said, are really doing well. We don't have a platform for home online learning. If we had an online learning platform, it would look more like discussion boards that are required. It would be more posting, updating daily information and assignments that are hooked to a grade book. And there would be an accountability piece for principals to check in and walk through those courses. So it's very different than an online platform using Google Classroom or emailing or hard copies of assignments. But the stress on students is a major concern. And with an online learning platform, you also have the ability to actually deliver your curriculum in whole, not essential learning opportunities. So that's something to be considered as well.
Okay, anyone else, Trina, that you want to have kind of add to that discussion? Or anyone else want to chime in on that?
Teresa, would you like to kind of share what you've been hearing about your kids and your perspective?
And what I've heard echoes a lot of what you've already heard. We talk a lot about mitigation efforts for the disease, and I think, or, for the virus, and I think what we're doing is mitigation efforts for the emotional trauma that kids are experiencing because of this. So for the venture staff, the marching orders have really been about pull them in close, speak to the social emotional piece, and listen to them and give them as much curriculum as you can. And we do have some kids that are In fact, one of our teachers got kind of chewed out because he was wasting her time. And so he did create some lessons that were more challenging and had more rigor. So our teachers are really trying to listen to what the kids need and to provide the services that are going to be beneficial for them. I don't have the same range of students at Venture that we would see at CHS and Lake City, of course. What I'm seeing and hearing from families is they're doing work that was deemed non-essential. They've been laid off. One family in particular, it's the mom, her son, her daughter, and her grandchild in a 1-bedroom apartment, borrowing the neighbor's internet and just trying to make it work. And I guess it's hard for me to see how can we grade in a way that's fair and equitable and truly measures what the kids have learned. So I guess that would be my feedback or input.
Okay, why don't I open it up to questions, or Dr. Cook, if you had something else to add there, but if not, why don't we just have board members and we'll try to go one at a time and just ask questions.
Before we open this up to questions, I will tell you that we've gotten a lot of emails and communications from folks who desire the opportunity for their kids to compete for some form of a grade. We actually have gotten quite a bit of that feedback. And while we're hearing on the ground, we're hearing concerns about kids just being able to function and just being able to deal with this life as is this new normal for right now. That's real. And I don't want to understate that. That is very real, that we've got a lot of families that are just struggling to get by. But I also don't want to downplay the fact that we've got families who are saying, my kid is trying to compete for scholarships. My kid is trying to compete for opportunities for acceptance into programs, universities and colleges all over the country. And they're hearing stories about students in other states having a different pathway, and these other students in other states having a completely different way of that they can still get grades, for example, and they can still contribute to their GPA. And so we have this kind of almost two groups that we're trying to talk through this pandemic. And that is, are these students that just, can we get their basic needs met? Can we meet their emotional demands of the circumstances they're under? And some of these families are being devastated financially, while we also have families that have students that have, 4 kids in the household, each with their own laptop with plenty of Wi-Fi, and would function just fine if they had very rigorous instruction and learning opportunities from what we're trying to provide. And so when we say, let's just set it up as as pass fail, you kind of, we're leaning towards, I think, towards students that maybe don't have all the options, don't have all the access. But we also recognize the fact that there are kids, and we are hearing from those kids, oftentimes themselves, that they want the opportunity to continue to fight for the grades that they were either on path to earn, or maybe they didn't have such a great fall and they had a great second part of their second semester. They started off well, and now with a pass-fail model, they're feeling like that's a punitive action towards them because they got their act together and now they're fighting for this. And I would mind you that when I talk about we're hearing from families, this is almost in complete inclusivity, just a high school issue. I haven't heard one complaint, and I'm not saying they don't exist, but I haven't heard one at the elementary level, and I've heard very few, less than a handful at the middle school level. This is primarily a conversation that we're hearing across the district regarding high school performance and whether or not those kids have an opportunity to compete. So.
Steve, maybe just real quick to kick off the discussion, what's in your viewpoint and your team's viewpoint, what's the purpose of the remote learning? What are we trying to accomplish between here and June 8th or 9th, whenever we're done?
I think that's the driving question: are we doing school as normal? And I think the the answer to that is we're doing school as normal as we possibly can. And so when we communicate, and we were intentional when we chose the words remote learning, because we're not going to pretend to stand up an online school. You heard Deanne mentioned a learning platform and ways to administer learning in a little more efficient means. And quite frankly, I would tell you that there's no capacity in our system right now to stand up an online school in a few weeks to function for 10 weeks. The development of an online school takes a couple of years, and you get it up and running in a few weeks, few months to get it going, and then you get good at it over time. And so one of the things that we pushed out early on, and we checked on this, as of 2018-19 school year, there were just under 70 million students in the United States in schools. If you include virtual schools in that total, only virtual schools, 300,000 students are in virtual schools alone. That's less than 0.5% of students in the entire United States that are participating in a learning environment like we're doing right now. So when you ask what's the purpose of remote learning, it was to narrow the scope of what we felt like was most essential that we had to have kids learn, bring it into something that's controllable and manageable by teachers, support them in developing a path for kids forward in that what's deemed most essential, give the kids great feedback and input on their learning as they perform in that learning environment, and then to try to keep them held harmless from their GPA or their grades in the meantime, and essentially make sure that while we're in this global pandemic, that kids don't suffer during that time frame based upon that, as far as grades and as far as opportunities. And so the last piece of that, I have to add, functions from the assumption that since, like, I think 98% of the students in the United States right now are under some kind of closure order across the country, that the assumptions we had to put in place is that that's going to be recognized by higher ed, colleges, universities, the military, certification programs across the country, that kids are going to have an opportunity to compete in those, and people will recognize that whatever happens this semester is exceptions, and it is exception to the rule. If that's not the case, then we do have some issues that are going to be a challenge. So remote learning is to try to do our best to function in that environment and to produce a path for our seniors and our high school kids to get as best of a learning opportunity as they can during this time, and then set them up for success for once we re-enter it back into brick and mortar schools. And I should add one thing, also to really stand up as much social emotional support during this time to make sure that kids know we're connected to them, to provide basic services like feeding them and making sure they have 2 meals a day if it's necessary, and just be a pillar for them to lean on while some people are struggling with this, and being that resource in the community to help provide that. And so that has turned out for some kids to be the single most important thing that we offer, is just the fact they're getting 2 meals from us and that they're staying connected to the real world in some fashion through the connections and the communications that we're putting out, and the relationships between their teachers and themselves.
Okay, thank you. One more question I'd like to ask is just in regard to pass-fail, and this is at high school or high school credit classes. What does that mean in our district, just so we're all on the same page, as far as I've seen it communicated out different ways throughout the district, right? And at some that was kind of based on March 13th, and some maybe it's not. So when we say pass-fail, what are we talking about?
Yeah, I think let me see if I can qualify that, because it's actually a really important question, because I'm not sure we're even in agreement right now in the system what pass-fail means based upon some of the communication that's gone out there. I think the first thing it means, and let me back up even before pass-fail, and I think we have to start with that statement that has been pushed out by our state board, and that is to ensure that no student is negatively impacted due to COVID. And so if we take that as the starting place, if a student is passing, we want to do everything in our power to maintain that they have that opportunity to pass. I think failure, when we say pass-fail, would have to be based upon something that is completely, obviously they're egregiously not giving good effort when they could. Pass fail to me is if they can participate, they are participating, they are giving effort, and they are doing what they can. I think it's going to be really challenging for us to fail a kid unless a kid is being egregiously ignoring what it is that we're asking them to do. And so even in our own communication with pass fail, we're talking about the fact that it might be likely that some kids' circumstances at home are so bad that we may have to give them opportunity when we get back together to plead their case, almost as in an appeal or something like that, to say, here's the circumstances that we were in, here's why I couldn't perform the way I needed to, and then we find a way to work that through. So I think generally, when we say pass fail, we're talking about do no harm, try to get kids the credits they need, so they're either as seniors, they're going to graduate, or as underclassmen, that they're competing for what they need so that in future years, they're still going to maintain their track towards graduation. But holding this semester out as an exception regarding their GPA and their grades, as saying that this semester is the semester that we would not consider those to be a part of it. So in play it out, and we go back to school, and let's start from the assumption that every kid passes every class that they've got this year. And in 3 or 4 years, when they're competing as seniors and they're to graduate, they would have one semester of just pass-fail, of just passing classes during this semester, and their GPA would be based upon the other 7 semesters they would be a part of our system. Does that answer your question, Chair Morshow?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, why don't I open it up for board questions?
I have a quick question. Are those districts right now that are actually giving grades, such as Boise, does their platform look really different than our platform right now and what we're able to deliver? I guess I'm not familiar with what Boise has out there as far as a actual platform.
I think it's generally acceptable to presume that all high schools across the state are doing something similar. There's a lot of Google Classroom going on right now in the state. There's a lot of, there's not a tremendous amount. There are some online high schools in our state, and those are functioning separately. They're actually have become a thought leader for the rest of the state in how they're supporting the work that we're doing. But generally the idea is we're all about doing the same thing right now, which is trying to find a way to get lessons in front of kids that are meaningful and useful. And so the fact that there's an inconsistent approach on how they're being graded across the state could be warranted as highly problematic, because we're all doing this about the same way, which is either videotaping lessons and posting them online, or presenting something in a Google Classroom, or posting it onto Clever or some other kind of app in which kids can access that information, students can access that information.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Jennifer or Lisa, Tambra, any questions or comments that you guys have?
I don't have questions. I obviously have comments, but I don't know that we're there yet.
I had a question, and Trina, you might be the best person to help with this. It's so confusing for students that are taking courses through an online platform, IDLA or some sort of independent accredited course. Those students, those classes have continued as normal for the most part. So will those students then, if we continued with this pass-fail plan, would they receive credit for their courses? So if a student's taking an IDLA course and they get an A or a B, we would have to accept their credit. And wouldn't we have to accept their grade, and we couldn't prevent that being counted in their GPA? Or what is the plan for handling those sorts of situations?
What we had talked about is if we were going to strictly a pass-fail system this spring, what we would do is if students, whether it's a dual credit course or IDLA, and they received a letter grade, When it came to our transcripting on in our system, we would give them a pass or fail based on that grade. So for example, a student at NIC, if they're taking a dual credit class for NIC's transcript, they may get the B on NIC's transcript, but they would get a pass on ours. What we didn't want to create like two systems, a dual system, one's for all students. We wanted a system for all students and not pit one group of students over another.
Yeah, I get that. I think it could be problematic. You know, we have charter students that are taking math courses, for instance, that transfer over or whatever foreign language course. So, for instance, charter is one of those schools that's continuing with grades. And so if those students have fairly earned those grades, are we comfortable with not allowing them to receive credit for the grade they earned? I guess for me, that's a little bit of the question I'd kind of like to explore, because those courses have continued on for the most part normally. And I think the second question I have is the inconsistency in grading across the state for me is difficult. If Boise and West Ada were utilizing a pass-fail platform, it would be easier, but I worry if we are inadvertently disadvantaging our students by being the largest district in the northern region using a pass-fail method, and all the larger southern schools then are utilizing grades. I worry if that would negatively affect our students as they apply to colleges in the coming years.
I'll take on the second part of your question. I think that is maybe one of the most important questions, because I think if you analyze West Ada's approach, essentially what they're saying is if a kid's grade is where a kid wants it to be, I shouldn't say kid, when a student's grade is where it was, if they had an A on March 13th and they essentially freeze those grades, and then those grades can do their learning, nothing that happens in their learning between March 13th and now can negatively impact that grade. So if they have an A, that A stands. If they have a B and they perform well between that frozen time and now, they can actually get their grade up to an A. And so those kids, theoretically, their grade can never go down past that point and can only go up. And so you're either going to have the benefit of the frozen grade you desire, or you get the benefit of the work that you do in the meantime to raise that grade through the lens of expectations of the teacher. And so those kids have a relatively good shot at grade improvement through this semester. And so you could very easily argue that that's putting them at an advantage over districts that are doing pass-fail, because we're not allowing our kids to have that same highly benefited opportunity to compete for that same A. And so the truth comes down to the assumption, and I think that's probably why we landed where we did, was the assumption that since essentially all of the students across the country are being impacted by this right now, that higher ed is going to have to take note of that. And I would assume that most students' GPAs during this window of time are going to be suspect at the very best, depending on what happens with those grades. I do totally recognize, and I value your question, Trustee May. I think it is the single most important question. Are we putting our own students at a disadvantage by saying pass-fail if Boise's or West Ada's model is being in place there, and those kids could potentially come out with 6 or 7 more A's, if you will. And if those are honors classes, weighted A's in their GPA calculations, that would then pit their students above ours in an overall calculation. And if colleges are still treating this as the same as they always have, I would find that problematic as well.
I guess the second part to that question is, if we have a platform that allows students to increase their grade if they're failing, so we're allowing the opportunity for students to do work and to receive credit for that work. It might not be a letter grade, but it's receiving credit for work done. Then are we giving preference to one group of students? So is it only important that students that are failing continue to turn work in to earn a better grade? I think for me, those are the two moral issues that I keep going round and round with, that we're not disadvantaging any particular group of student. We want all of our students to succeed and receive credit and for the grades that they've earned, I guess. And so I think we'd have to massage who's able to increase their grade if we're going to go with a pass-fail, because, we're allowing one group of students, but at what marker, this pass-fail is really nebulous. And I think it could be difficult and confusing for some students and families.
So in the scenario of the student as of March 13th that had the A, then that's the grade they receive, regardless if they do anything else from March 13th on?
Yes.
That's also a problem. And then how do you even, so my kid that has straight A's can technically do nothing from here on out and have straight A's. There's still so much time from March 13th to June. And we know that we've seen kids start out and struggle and get to do that. That also doesn't seem, how do you even deal with that then if they can't get anything less than what they have? What's their motivation?
Tamara, I would say though, on the flip side of that it's an equally unmotivating prospect to have a pass, no pass.
Right, because if they're already passing, then there's no motivation. So there's really only motivation if you need to get your grades up.
I think we're stuck with the lack of motivation being just there's nothing you can do unless you go with, I don't remember which district it was, that says you continue to actually earn your letter grade all the way through the end of the school year. And I'm not sure that philosophically I agree with that idea, that you could actually be harmed based on this because you couldn't continue on and participate in some fashion. But if the overall concept is that no harm would be done, then you have the same problem on a pass-fail versus a letter grade.
And when I mean motivation, I don't mean like there's kids that are going to want to get their grades up, but they just can't. Take, for instance, the student in all those scenarios who's now the sole provider for their family. Like that student could be just as motivated as another student who's, bound to go to college and needs the GPA for scholarships and whatnot. But now it's between going to work and feeding my family, or so I don't want to take away that there wouldn't be motivation from everyone. There's just so many. I appreciated the different scenarios that you guys gave of our actual students and what they're facing. This is going to be a difficult decision.
I think for me, one of the scenarios, and I don't know if it was maybe a letter that we received, but the group of students who have worked really hard this semester and are doing much better than they did the prior semester, and by freezing grades for them, they will be disadvantaged, and so the work and effort that they achieved this semester won't count. And so on a contracted, 4-year cycle where every semester counts, I think that's a group of students that we could inadvertently disenfranchise. And I hope that we can come to some sort of resolution that allows for all students to come away from this unharmed. And I think there's no right solution, but finding a way that allows those students that grades will be important. We've seen 3 major universities today, University of Washington, Gonzaga, and the University of Oregon, saying they're not using SATs this year for admissions. And so unfortunately, grades probably will be looked at for those districts that allow students to use them on their transcript, because they won't have any other indicators for admissions. And so if we have students that are clearly on that track and feel as though their grades are important for their future success, I feel difficult in denying them that opportunity to continue to work towards their grade. But taking it away at this stage, especially with Boise and West Ada, 2 large districts that I think we should look to for guidance at times, is difficult.
What does that look like too for teachers giving the option? Like, I have 10 students who want to do pass-fail, and I have however many students that want to do grades, and then entering that all in, and then how we're going to, I understand doing one, it makes it nice and easy, but what would that look like with option? We did both options.
I would love to have Deanne or Libby opine on that question. I think it's a fantastic question.
I actually think that would be, if we were told that we were going to be doing letter grades, then they would be calculating letter grades. If we were told we were going to be passing or pass fail or pass no pass, then we would be calculating letter grades, and we would, you all would be guiding us, or we would determine what grade constitutes a pass, and we would translate that. So it wouldn't be at a teacher level. If you're talking about appeals, you're talking about a student appealing whether or not they get a grade on their transcript for that particular course. They would appeal that through in the counselor scenario or at the school level. So teachers would be calculating their grade, and we've calculated grade through March 13th, and kids are able to be working on things to try and improve that grade and continuing learning opportunities at this point, not the whole curriculum. So we've calculated the grade as of March 13th, and that grade could be a pass fail or a letter grade. We would be able to determine that. And again, if there was an appeals process, what that looks like and how we proceed would be something that would have to be determined at the administration counseling level, because the teacher, we couldn't make the teacher go through the appeals process. That would have to be something administrative, in my opinion. It would be better if we had appeals for a letter grade on your transcript versus calculating a GPA or not is going to be a big question, because you can get a letter grade on your transcript for a course, and we could not calculate this semester GPA toward ranking and those types of things as well. So appealing a GPA versus appealing a grade could be two different things.
And let me just add, one of the things I think that will help for the way we think about this is if you think about pass fail from the lens of credits and no credits, that helps give some clarity as to the intentionality and why we use that language. Whereas grades talk about things like GPA and or ability to compete for things like class rank and that kind of stuff. And those two things can't necessarily be decoupled. I think if we were to do something like say, okay, we're going to do pass fail with an option for competing for GPAs, then, or excuse me, for grades, then now you're bringing, so let's say 20% of our students want to compete for grades. Now, do those 20% of those students have grades at the end of this year, and then those are counted in their GPA, and then those 80% that chose pass fail only are not? That's something that we're going to have to determine. And I think that's why we've separated that out in the proposed resolution, that each one of those aspects is treated separately.
And I would also just add to that too, when we're talking letter grades, there's educational institutions have that assumption that if a student has a letter grade, that they're receiving the full curriculum under normal circumstances. And even in the past, when we've used pass or fail, it usually means that there's been a situation. So for example, in the past, we've had students that have been on homebound, and instead of giving them a letter grade, we will do, for a special circumstance, we may do a pass or a fail. So again, we have to kind of remember what a grade signifies. A letter grade usually it makes that assumption that the student had access to the entire curriculum, and that's what their level of achievement was based on what they were able to demonstrate that they knew or were able to do. And a pass usually signifies that something else occurred, but the student knows enough to receive credit for the course.
I think in that regard, at least to me, it would be important that we recognize that, you know, the student maybe hasn't received the full curriculum, but that's due to no fault of their own, right? That's either the virus, right, or our inability to deliver. And ours, I'm not just Coeur d'Alene School District, but public schools in general, right? The inability to deliver with this kind of ramp up curriculum in that manner. So, you know, a lot of it comes to me is, are we doing harm, right? And this is a complicated situation. I think it's why we've seen so many different models across the state and across the country, right? There is no right answer. If there was, we'd all do it. but it's trying to do the best for our kids. And I think when you do one thing, it potentially hurts another group, right? Lisa, Trustee May, brought up an important point to me, at least. I kind of looked at my own record in high school, and you guys all know this, but anyone watching at home may not, but I didn't earn a lot of credits my first 2 years in school, and I really had to kind of rear load, and took a lot of credits my senior year. And I played with Excel spreadsheet today, and if I would have lost one of my semesters my senior year, it would have cost me 1/4 of a point in my GPA calculation, which is pretty significant. I wasn't in line for any scholarships or anything, so it wasn't going to hurt me there. But it was important for me just to develop the kind of I can do this and the desire to go on and continue my education. And I know what I would have done in a pass-fail model, and it probably wouldn't have been the same effort in a grade model. And Lisa, you might have been asking this. It was a question I had, but Spokane is kind of doing a hybrid maybe of pass-fail and grade. They're allowing the student, I think, to choice, or the family to choice if they want a letter grade. How would that look? I mean, does that create twice the work? Is that doable?
That was kind of the same question that I
So-
had asked Dr. Cook.
Yeah.
We didn't hear from Libby. I kind of wondered how that worked for him, which it sounds like it would be doable.
Yeah, I think it's doable. I think the Spokane model might be the most cumbersome for our teachers because it's going to give a lot of options, but I don't think it's undoable. It gives, essentially what it does is allow a student to opt in to what they feel like fits best for them, and then gives the teacher, assigns the teacher the authority, which is not unlike the way it's being done in most times anyway. The authority to then say, okay, these students have done what they need to meet the expectations during this time to demonstrate that level of competency that would be an A or a B or a C in this new and different environment. And by giving it option or giving it choice, it creates a pathway in which, at least in theory, kids can be protected in that choice by saying, this is what works best for me. And I think you could argue that creates the path of least harm for kids. And I think that's one of the reasons why Spokane supported that model, is that kids that want to say, you know what, my world is too overwhelming, I'm just going to do pass fail, they have that path. I think the place where the kids that want to compete for grades have that path. The place where you wind up getting into, is it similar for all? Does everybody have that equal opportunity to say, if I wanted an A, could I compete for that A based upon circumstances that are in my control, or are the circumstances inhibiting that opportunity? And that's where you wind up back in that equity conversation, I think. And so, if this were, I just be honest, if there were a perfect and easy answer for this, we would have already recommended that right now. And I'm not sure that any situation has a perfect answer, but I think it's very feasible that we could do something that has multiple options so that kids could meet, because kids' needs are different.
What does the Boise kind of West Ada model, what does pass fail provide that model doesn't provide? I guess that's kind of where I struggle, just with, how is that not allowing students to participate and improve their grade? And I kind of have a two-part to that, but I'll save my second part.
One of the differences I see is the example is the student that had all A's. If your grade is pretty much kept as it is, unless you want to improve it, there's no incentive to continue working because you already have A's. And then we do have some kids that are fine with their C. So I think the sticking part with that one is that your grade was already determined March 13th. And then you really get to decide, are you happy with that? Or do you want to do something with it? Or a pass, we're still encouraging kids, if you want to pass, you still need to engage in the learning. And that's where I see is the big difference between those two.
I guess I would say are we doing that? Because I think I've seen at least one communication that said if you were passing on March 13th, then you've passed. And you don't have to do any work from here on out. And so, and that kind of leads me to part two of my questions. The one thing I don't like about West Ada and Boise's model is what is the motivation to continue learning? Because I think ultimately that's what we want, right? We know we haven't delivered all of the content. There are some essentials that they need for next year. So how do we provide motivation to, continue on? And I don't know what that would look like, if it would be kind of a frozen grade, you can bring it up and you have to participate in 70% of the assignments. I don't know if that's something that's doable, but how do we keep a student motivated?
I wonder if we could qualify it. I know we've asked teachers to put out a good faith effort, and I think we need to have some level of involvement for kids to be able to establish their achievement, but also for that social emotional piece. I'd like students to be a part of something outside of their living room at this time in this crisis. So that would be something that we could delineate. What does that engagement look like to hold your A or to improve your D? Another point that I would like to make is I think it's important that we establish when they can opt in. If we're going to talk about an opting in for a grade, if it's too early on, that has certain issues around that. Or is it later? I know a lot of the universities you can kind of work and engage with your teacher and then determine whether you're going to do pass fail closer to the end of the school year. I don't have the answers. I just have things to consider.
Let me jump in on that too. And I think while I'm not a fan of the idea of freezing a letter grade and saying that's good for now, the idea of giving kids options is not something that I'm always in favor of. The way of doing the best you can to give kids choices. The reason that we're where we're at right now on this is that the choice isn't the same for all. Because of the circumstances, it creates discrepancy in the choice. And I'm also not gonna go down with the ship on that decision too. I believe that it's just difficult. There's not an easy path here forward. And the fact that kids could have that option and be able to do that choice and do so in a way, this is a real situation for kids. We're talking about almost 8 weeks of school, right? I mean, there's a lot of school left. And in Boise's, they're doing this kind of almost like the way we started with this at-home learning for the first couple of weeks. They're doing their version of that all the way until April 29th, in which they're not doing any new teaching until April 29th. It's all review of stuff that's already happening. And so in essence, what they're doing is giving kids that opportunity to take that March 13th grade and improve upon it already. And then starting on April 29th, then that's when new learning can take place from April 29th until the end of school. And I don't know the day that they're out, but I know they're out before we are. They don't go into June, but if you think that they're talking about somewhere between, let's say, 3 weeks, so then in essence, they're doing 3 weeks of new learning, whereas we're probably looking at, we started last week, right? So we're already in new learning going forward. And so I think, to Libby's point, that we would have to have some kind of idea on timing. I think that's really important. The idea of giving kids the option of competing for a grade if they see value in it for themselves and their path is something that we probably would need to start communicating rather quickly, because it's going to change the work that teachers are going to have to do. Back to Tambra's question. There are, if I've got 160 kids and 40 of them now want to go for grade and 120 of them, or vice versa, want to go for pass fail, then I've got to start building my expectations for both of those.
I definitely like the idea of giving families and students the option. And from what it sounds like, if they're still being graded or feedback, that it wouldn't be a problem for teachers to do if that was what we did in moving forward, that they're hopefully when they're getting assignments back, it's my understanding is I believe they're getting feedback or grade in high school, but feedback in middle school. So I just think there's no way around the equity issue right now in this. All of the scenarios, that was only 5. You guys could have sent us thousands of different family scenarios out there, but I think giving families the option of what would look best and work best for them and their students and having those conversations. I don't know, I think I'm a big fan of that.
I agree with you, Tamara. If I had to look at the models that we've been presented, I like Spokane's the best. I certainly open to discussion, but I like the idea that they can do a pass, no pass. I don't disagree that the motivation piece is important, but if philosophically it's the idea of no harm, I think they can have the grade they had on March 13th, or they can opt in to improve it, and they can opt in to do the pass, no pass, or they can opt in for a letter grade. That is what it was on March 13th, or improve it. I just think that the more options under these circumstances for kids to do what's best for them and their family is the best. And you're not gonna get around the equity. It is not gonna be equitable all the way around, but at least there's options for everybody and their circumstance. And so those are my thoughts. That's after reading everything from the board book last week and all the different scenarios and what other districts are doing. That's the most informed decision I feel I could make today on that topic.
On that note, I reached out to a couple friends that have students enrolled in Spokane and they're high schoolers, and it is it's nothing is set in stone. They're using the template where there's 3 options: pass, fail, grade. That cannot go down, can only go up. But then they have some credit options where the state's reducing some of their graduation requirements, kind of like what we're doing as far as senior project. But my good friend said that it's not fully clear how teachers are handling it, and AP courses are different than regular courses or a PE course, and so they're navigating it just like we are. And there's no, I think, one hard, fast way to go about doing it. But kind of we both agree that having options, even amongst a family where you have 3 different sets of kids, they all want different they all have different paths. And so for one of her kids, he's going to take some pass fails because he knows where he's going to go to school and he knows it'll be accepted. For another kid, they know what programs they need to get into, and so they're really going to work and do what they can to ensure that he can receive his grades. But I think for them, having the option and the opportunity to make that decision specific to their child was reassuring.
And I didn't follow up on Libby's comments either, but I don't disagree with pushing that decision out either. I don't think people should be beholden right now to make that choice. I don't know if it's mid-May or late May, but and maybe that's something that teachers need to know earlier rather than later. But I think families need to be given an opportunity to grapple with that, see what they can do, how they could manage it, and then make a decision.
I would
I
agree.
agree.
Sorry, Libby, because we've seen how fast it's changed from day to day, and that's how fast it's changing in our families that we are here speaking on behalf. Things can be totally different right now, and then a few weeks down the road they're facing something completely new. So I do agree on that. I'm not even sure what date or what that would look like, but sorry, go ahead, Libby.
I was just going to add that I think teachers and students have not caught their stride yet, and that would give them time to figure out, what does this remote learning look like as a teacher? What does this remote learning look like for me as a student, given the pressures at home, or given my support system?
Some students haven't even received their Chromebooks, right? I mean, that was today or yesterday, and so they're just beginning to figure it out. I guess for myself, the option, the Spokane option would be the way that I would lean as well, which gives as many opportunities for kids to choose what's best for them and for their situations. And pushing out that date will give them the chance, if things in their lives begin to tank even more, become more challenging, they'd be able to make in not a week, later on in May, what's the best option for different classes even. So, because some classes they'll be able to push ahead stronger, and maybe some classes it's just not going to work and be too much. So I'd lean towards the options for them as well.
So I think I would lean towards the Boise West Ada model. Coming into this with kind of a caveat that there be some expectation for continuing on. And I guess I should kind of check that. That would be, with proper preparation. That's the path I would choose. We've kind of already headed down this path and communicated out a pass-fail model. So, I'm okay with kind of the option where we're doing a Spokane model. We're giving both options. I think that's important. I think we've heard from a number of people where, for a variety of reasons, whether it's program-based or scholarship-based or athletic-based, GPA is important. They were counting on it. If we go to a pass-fail model, it's going to impact those families, the number of families that we've heard from, negatively, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I'd like, given the current situation, given what we've communicated out, that we work on this, option model. The other thing I wonder about is it, if we're going pass-fail, could it be like pass incomplete? And for those students who don't, they just can't right now, that we're giving them an option, whether it's in the fall or when we're back in buildings, or they can come into summer school down at Teresa's program, if that's an option, and maybe just fill in some gaps and complete a course that they had completed half of, and then for the last 10 weeks of the semester they couldn't do anything, that we not fail those students, but maybe leave them incomplete and allow them to complete the 10 weeks of work and get credit. Could something like that work?
So I would request that you guys jump in on the resolution and start making edits that you could take votes on, that would give us some guidance as to how you want to. There's a lot of good conversation going on with this right now, and I would want to capture that language in a way that you all are satisfied with, so that we know how to administer this going back into the system. Because right now, while I think we're generally agreeing that we like the idea of options, the way that's being communicated in discussion is actually quite a bit different. And so I would like us to capture that language. So if you would grab the resolution, we intentionally separated the components of that resolution, just in case there was a conversation such as this, and we wrote 5 sets of criteria so that we could administer the very clear expectations. And if you guys want to start modifying one or more of those 5, or even add some, that's what I'd ask us to do, is to have some conversation around the language on each one of those 5, and or if we feel like there are missing pieces, add another or 2.
Well, I think this is a little easier than maybe delving into actual language, unless somebody has language out of Spokane that we could pull if we're sort of all leaning in that direction and tweak that. That's the hard part. But when I read 2, I thought it was odd that we didn't include high schoolers in that, and that they're going to receive regular and careful feedback. and social and emotional growth and learning. I know you tried to separate it out, but I think it would be really good to include high school in that as well. But then we also deal with high school on its own merits as far as the grades. So that's that was just one thing I noticed that I thought, well, no, we need to include high school in the social and emotional growth and learning and being prepared for the next level. I definitely would want to change 3 then. I think the hard part today, unless somebody has language out of Spokane or somebody wants to take a stab at it, that's my struggle. I feel like we've given the feedback and maybe we have to come back at another time with a new resolution that outlines that, or we could be here a long time. Those are my thoughts.
So I just kind of preparing and anticipating, I don't know, where my thoughts were, I guess. I looked at the resolution and how could we incorporate West Ada or Boise's kind of statement in there. And I did take a stab at it. I drafted something that I'm happy to read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll tell you what I did. Part 3 there, I broke that out into 2 groups. So I'll just go ahead and read it. So first I put, this would be number 3, provide students enrolled in a high school credit-bearing course a grade of pass, not pass, which shall be recorded on the academic achievement record, but shall not receive grade point nor be used in determining GPA or class rank. And then number 4 says, allow students enrolled in a high school credit-bearing course the option with parent or guardian authorization to earn a letter grade based on the March 16th grade book. Additionally, schools shall allow student work to count during the closure if it will increase the student's academic standing. Student work completed during the school closure must not negatively impact a student's grade. For those selecting this option, grades shall be recorded on the academic record with grade point earned and used in determining GPA and class rank. And I just stole some of that language from West Ada and Boise. I'd be happy to send that out. But does everyone's board members have your computers if I send this out?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you? That'd be helpful.
Yep, I am attaching it and sending it now. I did like Jennifer's suggested edit to number 2 there as well.
To add high school.
Yeah, on number 2.
Yeah.
Would also be possible if we're talking about allowing some time for students to determine whether they wanted to take a grade or a pass fail, that we could work on the language. It's, I think, difficult for everyone to process coming up with the exact wording, and that way it would give the community an opportunity to weigh in on this, since we are essentially changing policy. You know, we could contract the time frame, but at least it would be out there and we could receive some comments, and we could, you know, give it a first good rough draft and then come back and look at it May 1st, or, you know, even before.
I just wanted to share that we have communicated with families that we are determining grades based on March 13th and their pass-fail grade, and it's going to be a pass-fail grade. And we have not communicated that there's any appeal or opt-in option. And so for 4 weeks, students have been working under that assumption and engaging in classes with that assumption. And also, of course, those kids who can't engage are not going to be opting in because they can't improve their grade or change anything because they have no ability to. And so I am adamantly, I apologize for being so blunt, but I'm adamantly opposed to having an opt-in for a grade. If we hold the GPA true, that might be something that it's no GPA calculation, but this puts so many students at such a disadvantage because they will have a pass on their transcript when other students from our district would have a grade on their transcript through no fault of their own. And then we would be explaining to colleges and universities different scenarios for different students, which would be very difficult to do. I would urge to think about one course of action, pass fail or pass no pass, based on March 13th grade. Encouraging students to engage in their learning is more than just a grade. Yeah, it's in big part, it's a grade, and I get that, but we're engaging students in as much work as they can possibly do with as many students as possible right now. And we are not delivering our whole curriculum. Students are not earning an A in pre-calculus. They're earning an A in the first 6 weeks or 7 weeks, 6.5 weeks of pre-calculus. So I just wanted to voice that. Thanks for listening.
I think being part of those comments gave me a little bit of pause because in some of our core courses like pre-calculus, algebra, our freshman, sophomore, junior English courses, our students need to be receiving as much material as they can. And I recognize there are hardships for many of our students, but I think even hearing that gives me pause for next year. And there's a growing amount of data out about our students across the country and next year and the deficits they will have. And so I'm hopeful that we are providing them with as much, at least, access to the coursework so they can keep up, whether we're grading it or not. I hope that we're giving them what they need to go on to the next level next year, because we will not have the opportunity, most likely, to remediate these students that need these building blocks to go on to these upper level courses. And it could make next year really difficult for students who plan on moving forward. And so we haven't had that conversation yet. I'm sure that it's to come, whether it's summer school or options for students this summer to take more online courses. But I don't want families to panic and think that their students will be underprepared for next year.
Yeah, I'll just acknowledge, I think what Deanne said is true, that communication has taken place and that puts us in a difficult situation. But I think, there's so many moving pieces and this has moved so fast that there's just a lot to consider as we go along. As much as Deanne opposes this idea, I would equally oppose pass-fail as the only option. To me, that is not an option. I really came in today with really a West Ada model, Boise model, that if we're doing one option, it's that we're offering grades.
So I'm going to offer up to let us take those edits and let us make sure we get those edits into some version that we can circulate with you guys, and give an opportunity for you guys to see if it does meet your expectations. And Seth has shared that. Seth, is it accurate for me to state that this is exactly as Casey read it? Is that accurate?
Yeah, Chair Morrisroe just sent this to me, and so I'm projecting his edits on the screen.
The other issue I felt like we wanted to hear, and I just want to make sure that someone said this, I want to get you guys back up, that we wanted to add something on timing, a statement on timing, to give folks the ability to process what works best for them, and add that as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of what was said.
Yes, I would agree with that. And also adding high schoolers into number 2 in some capacity.
Got that one.
I would just say I'm not opposed to us taking a little bit of time on this and receiving some comment, but you know, Deanne alluded to it that you know, the clock's ticking and we have students that are making choices today or perhaps on what they heard 2 weeks ago about their level of engagement. And if this is going to be an option, and it sounds like it's going to be an option in some version, and maybe we need to figure out what that version is. I feel like we need to decide that very quickly and get that communicated very quickly. So we're not impacting students further by waiting and waiting and waiting.
I agree with Casey. I had the same thought. I thought when I said maybe get some time for turnaround to look at the resolution, I wasn't thinking 2 weeks. I was thinking like Friday or Monday or Tuesday next week.
So quick turnaround.
Yes.
I mean, we do have at this point the workshop scheduled for Monday night. If we wanted to put this on as, you know, if we want to work on it and put it on as consent, or we could, you know, add it as a discussion item, I guess, an action item.
I think it should be an action item, just in the event that there's change that needed to be discussed in some fashion. My hope would be that it's mostly consent, but.
Is it possible to ask a quick question, Casey? I'm reading yours right now, 3 and 4. So 3 is considering if someone's choosing or opting in for a pass-fail, that would not be calculated in determining GPA or class rank. But then if the student opted for selecting grades, then that would opt in. So I make sure I'm understanding it. For those selecting this option, grade shall be recorded on the academic achievement record with grade points earned used in determining GPA or class rank.
Yeah, yes, I did include that in there because that seems to me to be the catalyst for most people that are asking for grades to be calculated. Tends to have some sort of either college or GPA type implication. And so,
yeah, I just wanted to make sure I interpreted it correctly.
Generally speaking, Casey, I like the language. I think just making the change to 2 and adding in a time frame with maybe some input, Dr. Cook, you could get from your administrators on when that option would be best for teachers to know.
That shouldn't be a problem.
the one thing I did change on this in number 4, and like I said, I think I borrowed much of that from West Ada's language, is where they had additionally schools, and I have shall allow student work to count. They had may. And so may just, Ms. Brumley can probably appreciate that. May seems more optional than shall to me. And so I changed may to shall.
And Casey, am I misunderstanding? Because what you wrote here is what I read Spokane is doing. So when I was saying Spokane, are we saying the same thing with you saying Boise and me saying Spokane?
We are, you know, because we're giving an option and West Ada isn't. I didn't see Spokane's language, and I think Trustee May pointed to this. They're still a little up in the air, right? They've kind of put out the concept, but they don't have the details, at least that I've seen yet, in how they're administering it. And so 3 was basically the language that administration already had.
Okay, that's what
and then
I
4 was a new bullet that I created, kind of using that Boise West Ada language.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So can I get some clarification on 4? Allow students enrolled in a high school credit-bearing course the option with parent guardian authorization to earn a letter grade based on the March 16th grade book. So in essence, we're saying that that's the starting point. Is that correct? Are we doing it similar in the West Ada Boise model in that that if a student has a B or a C as of the March 16th grade, that's their starting point. Additionally, if they want, they could do work to improve that, but not inhibit that grade or lower that grade. Is that accurate?
That was my belief, it kind of falling in line with number 1 that says no student shall be,
Right.
or no student is negatively impacted.
My question is, and I think I might be answering myself, is that to earn a letter grade based on the March 16th grade book, in essence, that statement is that their letter grade is the grade on March 16th, unless they choose to try to improve it, correct?
That's how I read it.
Okay.
So by that, does that leave an out then for not doing any work between now and the end of the school year? If I had an A on March 16th.
Yeah, if you have an A, you're
Not an
golden.
So I'm a little concerned about that because there's a lot of learning still between now and then, and that there's where's that continual motivation and where's the next part of that work?
But what do you do on the flip side of kids
I
who
know.
can't do anything right now? I just don't. That's why I said earlier, I think if we're philosophically all in on one, you gotta take the gut shot that the gut punch that some kids may not do much.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, it's on all spectrums, and it's the hard part about that. But
Yeah, I get it too, but those students that we're talking about, I mean, you've got your students that are going to stay motivated,
yeah,
regardless of the situation, and probably the same as when they're in school and out of school, and some that may be a little less motivated. But I think overall this looks pretty good, as long as we are clear about the grade in the grade book and being able to, raise it but not negatively impact.
And I think that's the piece where there'd have to be opportunity for students to increase their grades, whether it's through participation or whatever it would be. I think otherwise that drop dead date, like the grades you have is the grades you have. It needs to be a system where students that do want to come from a D to a C or a C to a B have that opportunity that's fair and equitable. It seems like it's a reasonable way to go, and that teachers could find a way to provide those learning opportunities.
All right, I think I know what we've got. Why don't you give us a shot to rewrite this and then get it back to you guys, and we'll, if we get general consensus that we've captured the timing language, the rewrite on this, and adding the high school to number 2, then we can post this and open it up for public comment for the rest of the week, and maybe have some feedback for you going into Monday's meeting.
And are you, for
let's.
feedback, are you thinking like just reaching out to our high school communities on this? Because I know we've heard, the feedback we have heard seems to be from one high school. So how would that, what do you think that's going to look like moving forward, so we can make sure we're reaching all 3?
Well, I would suggest, first of all, we ship it to all 3 high school families, and I think we're making it, unless you guys would direct us to do it differently. I'm not sure we're interested at this point, including middle school or elementary school in the conversation. So I would suggest that we frame that when we send it out, and we could have Scott write that we're looking for input on this from the school communities and families that might have thoughts about how we're doing it. And here's the language that it will be up for consideration for Monday, and just see what input that draws. And I think it's really important we get it out as soon as we can, and we give people that opportunity to comment on it, because we're not going to have a tremendous amount of time if we're going to try and turn this around and put it into place. And that's April 20th is a Monday. So even by that point, if we're talking about giving some grace period for when this would be implemented and when teachers would have to know and have a decision on how to help kids that choose to compete for the grade, there's going to be a window of time that's going to take place too. So I feel like I don't want to sit on this. I want to move pretty quick.
Hey, Steve, just to clarify the middle school piece, there would be a small number of middle school students who are taking maybe a high school math course. And so obviously this would apply to them, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's why we use the language that I think it didn't just say high schools, it's high schoolers. I said students enrolled in high school credit bearing courses, so that we captured those 8th graders and maybe even a few 7th graders, I think.
It'd be Spanish too, I think.
Yeah.
Students that are in Spanish 1. Okay. So reasonable to assume we can get that communication out tomorrow to
Yes.
the community at large? So you're going to work on some edits this afternoon and run that through the 5 of us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Today or by
Yeah.
morning?
Yeah,
And
no,
then we'll get
today. We'll
something
have
out
it to you
tomorrow.
today. Unless a global pandemic or something happens, we'll have it to you today.
And then
Okay.
when we're requesting input, are we going to have it go to a specific person like we kind of did with the boundary review committee? That was nice, and then filter it all through. So we're making sure we're getting all of them.
Yeah, I think that would be really beneficial. And we've gotten a lot of, I think I've gotten comments or emails. Trina's gotten them. All 3 of our high school principals have gotten them. I think it would be important, if we could, is to have people reply directly back to something that we can capture those and give a full record of that, because right now our feedback's fairly fragmented and that we've had so far in this conversation. So it'd be good for us to be able to give you that in a lump sum.
Thank you.
Can I ask a
Thanks, everybody, for
clarifying
your
question
time.
real quick?
Yes, sir.
We can certainly share this with families and parents and guardians, but are you also interested in having direct feedback from high school students?
Yeah, we've heard from a couple. We've gotten a couple emails, but that's just the ones that come to us. So we haven't been able to hear, like Dr. Cook said, each high school has been receiving feedback. So we haven't, they probably heard from students as well. I think that's definitely important.
Okay, thank you.
But that's just me. I don't know if
I agree.
everyone.
I agree.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we took a lot of time today. Thanks, everyone, for your input and the information. We will see you guys on Monday. So have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.